Imagine stepping into a bustling public square, and right in the center of the room, there's an air nomad whipping up this miniature, highly controlled cyclone.
Oh, wow.
Right. And directly across from them, an earthbender is just hurling sharp, jagged stones straight into the vortex.
Which honestly sounds like absolute chaos.
Totally. I mean, on the surface, if you didn't know better, you might think you were witnessing a duel to the death.
Yeah, you'd run for cover.
Exactly. But if you look closer, the stones aren't striking the air nomad and the wind isn't throwing the rocks back. They're, like, actually collaborating. And the history books we have in front of us call this display the ultimate expression of peace.
It's so counterintuitive, you know?
Yeah.
Because our modern sensibilities usually tell us that harmony is quiet.
Right.
We kind of think of a choir where everyone wears the exact same robe and blends their voices so perfectly that no single individual stands out.
You just blend in.
Exactly. The whole goal of that kind of peace is the erasure of the individual for the sake of the collective. We're essentially taught to smooth out our edges.
But what if I told you that true harmony requires the exact opposite?
It's a wild thought.
It really is. So, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we're opening up a massive stack of historical logs, philosophical treatises, and personal journals detailing the era of Avatar Soryūna.
Such a fascinating period.
Oh, absolutely. We're stepping into the socio-philosophical landscape of a world that had literally just dragged itself out of a grueling century of global war.
Yeah, a really dark time.
And our mission for today's deep dive is to explore how this society achieved a state of genuine relationship. And they did it by embracing a radical, really counterintuitive idea that true wholeness is not the erasure of difference.
Which is huge. And it's an incredibly rich collection of sources we have on the table for this.
Oh, for sure.
We're looking at a world that transitioned from being deeply fractured and, let's be honest, deeply traumatized into something beautifully integrated.
Yeah.
And the crucial takeaway for you listening is that they didn't do it by pretending their historical differences and grievances didn't exist. They actually leaned into them.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to really understand the sheer beauty of Soryūna's era, we can't just skip to the happy ending.
No, you really can't.
We have to start in the dark. We have to look at the scars. This incredible unity they achieved wasn't some magical overnight fix where everyone just, suddenly decided to get along, right?
Far from it. The texts paint a much messier, more agonizing picture, honestly.
Messy is a good word for it.
Yeah, the world of Soryūna's era arrived at its wholeness the same way a diamond is formed in the earth, through immense time, tremendous pressure, and just slow, grueling work.
You really have to remember the context here.
Right. The worlds had suffered the genocide of the air nomads and the Fire Nation's century of aggressive imperial war. The cultural and physical wounds were staggeringly deep.
And what really stands out to me in these primary sources is that the healing wasn't just like a signed treaty, a handshake, and a new flag.
Oh, definitely not.
The texts describe a generation-spanning process. It was this slow reckoning of acknowledgement, apology, and active repair. And every single nation had to face its own specific demons. It wasn't one-size-fits-all therapy.
That is such a crucial distinction. Like the Earth nations, for instance, they had to reckon with their own histories of internal suppression.
Oh, right.
They had to really examine how their vast, diverse complexity had sometimes led to violent fragmentation and authoritarianism rather than, cultural richness.
And then the water tribes had to face their years of extreme isolation.
Exactly. Yes, that isolation had protected them from the brunt of the war, but the sources show it also severely limited them. It left specific social injuries and stagnancies in their communities.
And then, of course, you have the Fire Nation, which undertook what looks like the most visible, sustained reckoning of them all.
It was massive.
They had to confront a multi-generational ideology that had literally turned fire's natural gift of warmth and transformation into a weapon of consumption.
Yeah.
And the air nomads, they were rebuilding from near extinction.
Right. They weren't just repairing a damaged culture.
No. They had to invent something entirely new from total catastrophe, because too much had been destroyed to simply just go back to the way things were before the war.
That's true.
It makes me think of a severely broken bone. If you've ever fractured something, you know that if it's set right and heals, the calcification at the break site can actually make that specific spot stronger than it was before the injury.
That's a great analogy.
Right. Now, breaking the bone isn't a good thing. It's agonizing. But that deep, painful physical reckoning forces the body to build a more durable, examined structure. And it makes me wonder, did the trauma actually caused the wisdom? Like, was this level of harmony impossible for a society that was just comfortable?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the texts explicitly support that idea.
Wait, really?
Yeah, comfort doesn't forge this kind of resilience. The world that emerged from this long repair carried a wisdom that only repair can produce.
What?
They knew in their bones what it cost to lose wholeness. A comfortable tradition, one that has never been tested, rarely achieves that kind of genuine reinvention.
Because they've never had to.
Exactly. Because the society had lost nearly everything, they were deadly serious about maintaining the trust they were painstakingly building.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't just theoretical sociology for them. It was literal survival.
So if you're listening to this and thinking, okay, so they had a lot of political summits and truth commissions, hold on, because here is where it shifts from politics to something much deeper.
Oh yeah, the philosophical shift is huge.
This societal soul-searching revolutionized their actual philosophy of the physical world. They didn't just change their diplomacy, they fundamentally changed how they viewed the four elements themselves.
They did. They move entirely away from seeing the elements as a ranked hierarchy or as inherently competing forces.
Which is how it was viewed for centuries.
Right. Instead, the philosophical texts from this era began to describe them as a single living system, a biological systemic view.
I love that.
Yet each element required the others to be fully itself.
I just love the specifics of this in the sources. The elemental metaphors are brilliant.
They really are.
Like, fire needs the openness of air to breathe. If fire doesn't have air, it doesn't just weaken, it extinguishes entirely.
Exactly.
Or worse, if it's trapped, it turns inward and consumes what it was supposed to warm.
And air needs earth to move over. Wind without ground has no direction. It's just a vacuum.
Right.
The resistance of the landscape, the mountains, the valleys, the coasts, is what gives the wind its specific character, its updrafts, its intelligence.
Wait, let me pause right there. So if air needs earth to have direction, does that mean true freedom actually requires restriction?
Oh, that's a brilliant way to frame it. Yes.
It's incredible.
The philosophical journals of the air nomads from this time talk exactly about that. Openness requires grounding to be truly free. Otherwise, it's just dissipation.
And water needs all three simultaneously. It needs fire's heat to avoid freezing into rigidity. It needs earth for a path. I mean, without a riverbed or an ocean floor, water has no direction or memory. And it needs air to breathe at the surface where life actually organizes itself. It's just a beautiful concept.
It really is beautifully interconnected.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second.
Yeah.
We are talking about nations that had just spent 100 years trying to slaughter each other. Isn't it possible this whole living system concept was just a really convenient, beautifully packaged political metaphor?
Like a PR campaign.
Yeah, like a propaganda campaign they adopted to force themselves to stop fighting.
It's a fair skepticism, but if we connect this to the bigger picture and look at the personal letters of the benders themselves, it becomes really clear it wasn't a political stunt.
Okay, so it was genuine.
Very genuine. It was a rigorous description of reality. The texts note that philosophers and bending masters from completely different, isolated starting points independently arrived at the exact same truths.
Oh, like convergent evolution.
Precisely. When earthbenders and firebenders drill down into the deepest, most esoteric inquiries about their own respective elements, they kept finding each other at the bottom of the well.
Wow.
The deepest truth an earthbender discovered about stone included the necessity of air. It wasn't a treaty negotiated in a boardroom. It was an undeniable natural law they finally had the collective clarity to see.
Okay, so if the elements are already acting as one beautifully integrated system, what is the avatar supposed to do?
Right, what's their job?
Yeah, are they out of a job? This brings us to a fundamental shift in the avatar's role, and to Avatar Soryūna herself.
The role had to change entirely. Historically, the avatar represented the unity of the four nations. But previous avatars embodied this unity
Functionally.
Yes. They held the four elements together like a portfolio of assets. They had to deploy each element as a political or spiritual situation required, just constantly managing the balance from the top down.
Honestly, reading the accounts of past avatars, they sound like exhausted corporate project managers.
Yes.
They're just constantly running between squabbling departments, putting out literal and metaphorical fires, desperately trying to keep the building from burning down. It sounds like an incredibly heavy, complex burden.
That corporate manager analogy is spot on. But Soryūna wasn't the manager. She was the company culture.
Oh, I like that.
Soryūna was born an air nomad, in an era where the world had already achieved a degree of genuine unity. The forces of her era were already in concert.
So she didn't have to force it.
Exactly. She didn't have to manage conflict the way her predecessors did. She was free to simply live inside that unity.
The sources say she didn't just use the elements as bending techniques, but she integrated them into her psychological character.
Mhm.
She had the Earth's rootedness, knowing exactly where she stood without being rigid. She had water's emotional intelligence, the capacity to flow and carry deep grief.
Yeah.
She had fire's inner warmth, a genuine, sustained passion for life. And, of course, air's atmospheric openness.
She essentially became the world's most visible proof of its own possibility. By simply inhabiting herself without any armor, without needing to constantly police the world, she showed everyone that wholeness wasn't some distant, unachievable, utopian ideal to strive for.
Yeah.
It was available right now.
That's so powerful.
When people encountered her, they didn't experience four distinct elements fighting for dominance. They experienced total, unforced wholeness.
But here's where it gets really interesting, though, because Soryūna's embodied wholeness wasn't just this high-level, untouchable spiritual symbol that people worshipped from afar.
No, not at all.
It directly mirrored what ordinary, everyday people were actually doing on the ground. This era birthed what the texts call the great collaborative traditions.
The cross-cultural networks. This is where the philosophy meets the pavement.
Yes.
Because the world's borders were genuinely open,
Mhm.
you saw the flowering of collaborative art forms, new philosophical schools, and most practically revolutionary healing practices.
We absolutely have to talk about the Great Collaborative Healing Network.
That's amazing.
It was this informal grassroots web of traveling practitioners. And again, they weren't just throwing all their medical knowledge into a blender to make one generic treatment. They brought their distinct, unsmoothed strengths.
Exactly.
Let's look at how this actually worked. The sources describe these incredible multidisciplinary healing sessions.
The mechanism of it is fascinating. Let's take a hypothetical patient from the medical log, say a former soldier or a refugee suffering from severe, paralyzing physical and spiritual trauma.
Okay.
In the past, a water tribe healer might just try to soothe the energy pathways. But in this era, an entire team would arrive.
Right. And the Earth Nation healer would start by literally grounding the patient, working on those deep, compressed ancestral patterns, and the physical panic trapped in the bones and muscles.
Meanwhile, the air nomad healer wouldn't even touch the patient.
Which is so interesting.
They brought atmospheric permission. They manipulated the air in the room to create a literal and spiritual vacuum of judgment, a space so safe and pressureless that the patient's nervous system could finally drop its guard.
Wow.
This allowed the other traditions' work to actually penetrate.
Then the water tribe healer brings the emotional flow, flushing out the psychic blockages and guiding the patient through deep grief work.
Yes.
And finally, the Fire Nation healer provides warmth, literally reigniting the inner energetic furnace of a person whose soul had been suppressed or dimmed by trauma.
It treated the full human being. Body, emotion, spirit, history, the ground underfoot, the air in the room.
All of it.
And remember, there was no central hospital administration running this, no chief medical officer. It was just genuine relationship and trust between peers.
And it wasn't just healing, it was art too. Going back to our intro, those wind and stone performances absolutely blew my mind when I read about them.
Oh, the wind and stone performances are the perfect distillation of this era's philosophy. Air nomad wind dancers and Earth Nation stone sculptors working simultaneously in a shared space.
The dancer shapes the air currents around the sculptor's stone as it's emerging from the block, and the sculptor's chiseling choices create the physical resistance and direction for the dancer's air. Right.
They are responding to each other in real time. And to me, this completely shatters the modern myth we have of the melting pot.
How so?
Well, in a melting pot, you throw everything in, and it all melts down into a single uniform soup.
Right, you lose the individual ingredients.
Exactly. But in these performances, they aren't blended into mush. The stone remains incredibly hard. The wind remains entirely formless. They retain their absolute distinctiveness. Isn't it the actual friction between these two entirely different things that creates the harmony?
It's a vital point, and it cuts to the core philosophy of Soryūna's era. Harmony is not sameness.
Yes.
Today, we tend to think that if there is friction, harmony has failed. We think disagreement or contrasting natures are inherently bad.
Because it feels uncomfortable.
Exactly. But they understood that friction between genuinely different things is the dynamic, productive tension of harmony actually working. If you take away the stubborn hardness of the stone, The wind has nothing to dance against. It loses its shape. Keep in mind, for those of you listening who know your history, these are cultures that previously used this exact friction to wage war.
Yes.
Now, they are using it to create breathtaking art. And this high-level artistic and philosophical reality didn't stay locked in academic councils or elite performance halls.
No, it seeped into everything.
It filtered down into the very air the next generation breathed. It fundamentally altered the fabric of daily reality.
You see it vividly in the economic and domestic records. Take a mid-sized Earth Kingdom city market.
Okay.
It's seamlessly blended, water tribe preserved foods, Fire Nation ceramics fired at unique temperatures, air nomad textiles, and Earth Kingdom crops. And the merchants knew each other, not as representatives of rival flags, but as neighbors.
You see it in their homes, too. A family might have a water tribe title calendar hanging right next to a Fire Nation lamp that was specifically designed using air nomad concepts of light and ventilation.
It's just so integrated.
And the texts note that the spirit world responded to this integration, too. Spirits returned to the human world in droves.
And the way each nation recorded the spirit's return through their own cultural lens is very revealing.
Oh, yeah.
The air nomads wrote that the world had become more emotionally permeable. The Fire Nation recorded that spirits were drawn to the world's renewed inner warmth. The Earth Nations documented that underground presences were finally surfacing.
It's all the same thing.
Exactly. They're all describing the exact same phenomenon, that the human world was finally unblocked.
Soryūna herself conversed with ancient air spirits casually, like they were just visiting old friends dropping by for tea.
Right.
But for me, honestly, the most profound part of these sources is the children. Oh, the children of this era. They grew up seeing difference as richness, not danger. The texts mention that they naturally inherited a deep grief literacy.
Which raises an important question about societal development. What does grief literacy actually look like in practice for a child?
Exactly. It's such a striking phrase. When I dug into the primary sources, I found descriptions of playgrounds. Yeah. If a kid fell and scraped their knee or suffered a loss, the other children didn't look away awkwardly or tell them to stop crying or be strong like the wartime generations did.
Oh, wow.
Because of the water tribe and air nomad influences woven into their daily lives, these kids instinctively knew how to sit with a grieving friend. They held space for the flow of emotion. They were literate in the language of sadness, treating it as a natural weather pattern rather than a weakness.
The historical texts actually call this generation the harvest of the long planting.
That's beautiful.
They were the most emotionally fluent, cross-culturally capable generation to ever exist. But it's important to note this wasn't because they were genetically exceptional or magically enlightened individuals.
Right, they were just normal kids. But peace wasn't a subject they studied in a textbook. It was simply the weather.
Yeah.
It was the atmosphere they breathed. Their society had finally done the grueling work to give them a solid, integrated foundation to stand on.
They didn't have to spend their formative years unlearning prejudice or fear, because the adults around them actively modeled a world where difference was the condition of an interesting encounter, not the occasion for hostility.
Exactly.
The boundaries between us and them still existed for certain cultural practices. I mean, so stone was still stone, the wind was still wind, but those boundaries simply weren't the most important thing about them anymore.
It brings us to the ultimate lesson of this deep dive, synthesizing everything we've talked about today. If you take nothing else away from the era of Avatar Soryūna, let it be this: wholeness does not require completion.
Right.
It doesn't mean a perfect, static world without problems. It just requires all parts to be fully present and in genuine relationship.
And the profound paradox they mastered was that the part that is fully, unabashedly itself is what best serves the whole.
Yes.
If the Fire Nation decided to dim its passion just to take up less space and avoid offending anyone, it didn't serve the world better. It diminished the whole system. The world needed fire to burn with full warmth, just as it needed water to flow with full depth. Any diminishment of one part weakens the entire living system.
And Soryūna lived that truth until her very last moment. The sources describe her passing so beautifully.
They really do.
She didn't die in a solemn, quiet chamber surrounded by weeping dignitaries. She died mid-laugh, outdoors, reacting to the wind, doing something she found irresistible.
Wow.
She left behind a quality of knowing that spread like wind itself, impossible to contain, impossible to neatly categorize, and impossible to take back.
The world wasn't a flawless utopia after she left. It was alive, which means it was complex, occasionally messy, and always in process.
Right.
But her era had definitively proven that unity was not the end of distinct identities,
Yeah.
but their deepest, most vibrant fulfillment.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought to mull over. We started by talking about a choir, where everyone has to blend in, wear the same robe, and erase themselves to make a harmonious, comfortable sound. But if the history of Soryūna's era proves that trying to blend away our differences actually weakens us, what unique, perhaps spiky parts of your own identity are you currently suppressing for the sake of artificial harmony? How might bringing your full, distinct, unsmoothed self to the table actually heal the communities you belong to?